Speaking of souls wanting freedom, New York Times journalists, this is interesting. I'm actually curious what Saagar's going to say about this. Let's put this up on the screen. So, New York Times executive editor Dean Baquet has issued a Twitter reset for the newsroom, urging reporters to, quote, meaningfully reduce their Twitter time and reminding them that tweets and subtweets attacking or undermining their colleagues are not allowed. Let me read you a little bit from this memo that went out to all of the Times journalists. They say, we can rely too much on Twitter as a reporting or feedback tool, which is especially harmful to our journalism when our feeds become echo chambers. We can be overly focused on how Twitter will react to our work to the detriment of our mission and independence. We can make off-the-cuff responses that damage our journalistic reputations, and for too many of you, your experience of Twitter is shaped by harassment and attacks. Okay. If you do choose to stay on, so they're not saying like you have to get off, but if you do choose to stay on, we encourage you to meaningfully reduce how much time you're spending on the platform, tweeting or scrolling in relation to other parts of your job. So you might hear that and say, all right, well, that's kind of reasonable. I mean, to be honest with you, like I've scaled back my Twitter use and certainly my reading of my mentions, and it has been, I think, both better for me and also helps me create better content for the show without all of that noise in my head. But there's another part of this that is kind of not so great. Let's put this next piece up there on the screen, which is at a sort of like, panel event. Dean McKay elaborated on what his issue with Twitter was, and he said, I do not like it when somebody at the New York Times criticizes somebody at the Washington Post. I don't do that in any setting. It makes me uncomfortable when people do that. So part of the motive here, at least, and perhaps a lot of the motive here, is closing ranks in the journalism profession and not liking reporters being critical of other reporters when, of course, reporters are, they deserve scrutiny and they deserve critique in plenty of instances. So that's a part of this that I don't like. Overall, the idea of reducing Twitter use, the idea that people's brains have been rotted by it and they've lost touch with, like, what happens out there in the real world. Basically, the dictate to go out and touch grass, not a bad one, but using it to protect the other journalists in the profession, that's the part that's a problem.
Yeah, I have nuanced thoughts on this, which is I don't think the problem is Twitter. By the way, I fully endorse, I've also dramatically reduced my Twitter. I've turned off all notifications for people I don't follow. So if you subtweet me, I don't even know. You could be Jeff Bezos, I don't follow you. So I have no idea what you're saying. And it's way better mentally for me in order to check out from any of the nonsense, bad faith criticism, which is predominant on the platform. At the same time, it's a great way in order to aggregate information. Let's be honest. It's a cool newswire service. You get exposure to things that you wouldn't necessarily see. And if you do a good enough job, especially in our line of work, it's great. I don't think the problem is Twitter. I think the problem is the journalists themselves. That really what Twitter exposed us to was, oh, these people are as biased, as neoliberal, as insane as everybody always suspected that they were. We just never had a clear enough view. I can go on to any of these people's Twitter pages, and even the ones who try to keep it professional, in a time of social strife or during the election or whatever, it's very clear about what's going on.
See, but I don't mind that.
No, I like it.
Yeah, I would rather know.
That's what I'm saying. The problem's not Twitter.
I would rather have that transparency.
Right.
I think what does become a problem is, to your point about the problem is not really Twitter.
Yeah.
They live in such a bubble that then, it's one thing if you don't live in a bubble and you have a wide variety of experiences and people with different ideological views and people who are just like normal ass people who live in their lives. Like, it's a one thing if you have an array of those folks in your lives. And then you go to Twitter to see what the like hyper online people are saying and thinking about, and the wonks and the analysts and all of that. Then you have a more sort of like holistic picture of what's going on. But if you're someone who already is in a totally segregated bubble of elite opinion and people who are hyper-focused and obsessed with politics, and then you just fuel that with another representation of that bubble on Twitter, which is the place for elite opinion making, then yeah, you're just gonna end up continuing to go down that rabbit hole. So I don't know that getting off of Twitter is going to be much of a cure for journalists like figuring out how people in the rest of the country actually feel.
It's always been this way. And this is why I don't blame Twitter. The problem is the people and the journalists themselves. And when I was saying, I agree it's a good thing in order to see how biased these people are. But that's what they want to cover up. They're like, hey, you got to stop telling people this. You're hurting our reputation as the paper
stop being mean to
of
other
record.
journalists.
Yeah, and stop being
Little fragile flowers that they are.
Since the beginning of Washington, it has been a tiny little guild. In the days of the 1960s, the Washington Post editors dine in with the president, the whole, all the president's men, all of the Georgetown set, this great book people should go and read. Even today, all the elite cases of people who had COVID in DC, they were at the Gridiron Dinner, which is some cringe, fake secret society for elite journalists.
Where they pretend they're funny.
Where they pretend they're super cool because they wear white tails, and they're trying to reach the status of actually rich people in this country. So the rich people come, the journalists come. John Kerry was there. That's where Pelosi apparently got COVID. It's always been this way. Our digital actions are just a representation of our physical social structure. So I don't know. Look, it's funny. I definitely think Twitter has brought out the worst in people, but that has always been there to a certain extent. So the problem is not Twitter. It's the journalists. It's the institutions themselves.
Yeah. It also fits with this Twitter is not real life, sort of like, this is the new thinking about Twitter. And that was the idea of like, oh, this is part of why Biden won, is because he just like was not online at all. And Twitter is not real life, but it can be useful. It can provide you with certain insights about what things are really touching a nerve. And so, yeah, listen, I do want to say that I think if you have any sort of a sizable following, not reading your mentions, like not taking too much to heart what is going on, what's being said about you. I think that's the big thing. I really see this a lot where people get very, very, they basically become sort of psychologically broken by what they're choosing to consume. And it's like, just don't read that crap. Like, just don't read it and you'd be fine. So that part of it is probably just a good blanket idea for everybody. But yeah, the instinct to protect other journalists and to hide the partisan biases of the journalists at the Times is not a great one. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.